Rough drive over.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. Sorry.
She continues to voice her frustrations online, but one place she avoids is where Krista once called home.
This is the second time I've been here in 30 years. My life would not be the life it is without her. And yet, I feel like I've let her down because her life ended here. And I wasn't there.
You're here now, making a difference in the ways that you know how. You haven't let it go.
How can you expect a community to get involved in a case and give you any tips? I mean, you need a little bit more from the police department to get involved. And it's platforms like these that I think truly make the difference.
Who do you think has these answers? You know, friends, family, people who were with her that night?
I believe that the core of it lies with the people who were with her that night at Toto's.
And after that conversation with Mary Ann, we got a call that would change the entire story.
We won't give you all the details right now, obviously, because we will have to release it all at the same time, but he wants you to know that we have met with Mark Bennett, and Mark Bennett has agreed that we will charge a suspect on this case that we've identified. Unfortunately, the suspect is deceased. The FBI was involved, we were involved, the DA's office is involved.
Well, I certainly appreciate you giving me this. I really do appreciate it. It's awesome that, you know, you all have someone named and you've been, you know, you didn't forget about it. It's been 30 years.
Yeah, I can tell you that her biggest advocate, her biggest supporter to this point in time has been her niece, has been the one that's been, you know, pushing and prodding, if you will, the police department along the way, you know, like, hey, what's going on? What's the status of it?
That's amazing. Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for being transparent, for your honesty, and for looking out for us.
Not a problem, Hannah. I appreciate your advocacy on Krista's behalf and on all of our cold cases.
And that was a call from Detective Vandermolen, who's been working the case since 2020. You finally have a resolution. What? Just tell me.
We found an individual who lived in Wichita in 1989, and shortly after the murder of Krista Martin, October of '89, this individual up and left Wichita and went back to Arkansas. He lived around the corner from Krista Martin. I drove it one day, and it's 6 houses from Krista Martin's house where she was murdered at. And I was like, this is crazy. And it gives me goosebumps to talk about because it was there. We just didn't know it until, you know, a couple months ago.
What was there, though, was a family tree and a DNA profile of a potential suspect.
We use genetic genealogy on this case. It's kind of a big buzzword right now in law enforcement and across the country. This was one of the first 2 cases that we opened up with genetic genealogy in the Wichita Police Department. This was the first homicide that we looked at through that lens, and so that wasn't available back in '89. So it was down to one of 2 guys in that family. The guy that lived around the corner or a brother of his ultimately found that the suspect, of Krista Martin's case, his name is Paul Hart.
Is he 100% the person that did this?
I'm very confident that he is the individual that it was involved in this murder.
So now when you pulled this photo out and you're looking at her, what would you tell her?
I'd tell her that we finally caught the guy that did this to her and that she didn't deserve to get what happened to her. Then no one deserves that, you know, but she was in her own home, just young, 20 years old, enjoying life. And for what reason? You know, doesn't make sense to me.
Weeks after that conversation, a conference was held with what so many wanted to hear and what so many wanted to say.
Finally, in April of 2023, a possible suspect, Paul Hart, emerged. It was discovered Mr. Hart died in a traffic collision in Memphis, Tennessee in March of 1999. WPD investigators were able to utilize IgG techniques to confirm that Mr. Hart was the suspect in the 1989 homicide of Krista Martin.
My name is Ember Moore, and I'm the firstborn niece to Krista Martin. I first became involved with Krista's case in 2009 when I turned 21, which also happened to be the 20th anniversary of her death. I am glad we can finally move forward and have peace knowing that Krista's murderer is not walking around free or amongst us. Again, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone involved in bringing justice to Krista's case. She deserves so much more out of this life than what she ended up with.
Some would say justice has been served in this near 3-decade-old cold case that the Butler County Sheriff's Office continues to work. Some have been held accountable and served time, but it's never been completely closed. It all began when Franklin Herod, aka Punky Herod, reportedly vanished in July of 1997.
I never got to tell him goodbye.
His wife Kelly told investigators that he left to buy cigarettes and never returned to the Rose Hill home they once shared.
Investigators say he was a victim of a tangled web of deceit and betrayal.
The case eventually turned into a murder investigation when it was discovered that Kelly may have solicited Jerry and Tammy Trussell, a couple who they allowed to move in with them, to help kill Punky and bury his body.
Take our son's life to the way you did, and then carry our son's body in the back of your truck, trying to find a place to put him, like he's some kind of animal. And you sat there.
In 2005, Kelly, Punky's wife, along with Jerry and Tammy Trussell, were all arrested, convicted, and sentenced to prison for their roles in Punky's death.
He asked me if I might know where a hiding spot could be for the body.
Whose body?
Punky's.
You still haven't found him?
Not yet.
I can't imagine it's so difficult being 25 years, coming up on 26 June, that they haven't seen their son.
Investigators over the last year have reignited their efforts in recovering Punky's remains. They say someone familiar with the whole ordeal is giving them information, but stopping just shy from the exact location of where Punky's body was left.
Throughout that effort, we met with one of the responsible people that was convicted in this case, and they provided information of a location in the southern part of Butler County where he admits to participating in burying this individual.
But the case doesn't end here. New exclusive information connects this same individual to another cold case hundreds of miles away. That story continues after this break. What would you say to that person?
To the person who actually shot Miss Donaby, I'd tell him that this was completely meaningless. It was a decision that was made in haste, and that yes, you need to come and talk to us to do something to get this closed, because this isn't going to go away. And yes, we are going to continue. Even after I retire, after I leave here, there will be somebody who will be looking at these cases, who will take Miss Donaby's case. This will always be out there. You will keep seeing it in the media. You will keep hearing about it, and you will know that you were involved. And if you want to stop that from happening, the only way now is to help us to resolve it.
And while the 15-year anniversary of her death is approaching, Detective Chisholm says it's going to take someone to come forward to find any resolution in this case.
The firearm has not been recovered. If it was recovered, that would be great evidence, but then we'd have to work back that 15 years to try to put it in somebody's hands on June 30th of 2008. So right now it's primarily what we'd be looking for is somebody with the information who'd be willing to talk to us.
What would it mean to make that call to Annie Donaby in Arkansas to say, hey, we got him?
Excuse me a minute. I don't know that I'd make a call. There may be some I'd have to travel for.
Why does it make you emotional?
That's just me. These are all dead people. They were family members. They were all killed by somebody else. And there's family members who love them and want that closure. And that is a little hard for me sometimes to sit here and accept that we haven't done that.
We still trying to keep her name, memory alive, what happened. She was taken from us at an early age. She still was an honor student. You know, people still ask about her. It's like, you know, the sun, you know, it's still shining.
While tears race down her face, she recalls her niece all these years later. This is hers.
Oh, wow, yes. The most beautiful smile.
So you went from thinking, you know, your brother was married and moved off and starting a new life to never really hearing from him for 30 years, and then now you find out he was actually killed.
Yeah. Somebody would take him and just roll him up in a blanket and throw him in the dirt. You know, I just can't even wrap my head around somebody doing that to somebody.
James Crawford was 21 years old and living on the east side of Wichita when he went missing. It was reported that he left town and ceased all contact with people here locally. That wasn't even close to being the truth.
There was an original Wichita Police Department case where he was reported as a missing person. However, when follow-up was done with the family, they had been told that he had moved out of state or out of country, and the report was canceled or closed.
Deborah lives out of state and continues to wonder if she will ever know what her baby brother did to deserve this.
Why didn't I push more to try to figure out where he was? But I really thought that he moved away and was married, you know? And I still don't know what happened.
We've been able to provide back so many investigative leads, and we can compare our law enforcement sample that comes in and say up front whether we're certain we can build a profile or not.
Crawford's identity was made through utilizing DNA technology and forensic-grade genome sequencing by Othram. Othram is a one-of-a-kind lab out of Texas, and it's a growing team of nearly 70 specialists in their fields, and they send justice to cases all over. You all are doing something that no other place in the world is doing. Is that pretty safe to say?
Absolutely.
Tell me about his impact that it's left here in Garden City.
It was a huge loss, and it's been a huge loss. And just so many unanswered questions from that we continue to work diligently to answer.
But the department needs the public's continued help. You can't bring this loved one back, but you can put behind bars someone who did this.
Yes. Giving his family some closure, some answers to those, just why did this happen? Because you know that they ask themselves every day, why did this have to happen? It's human nature, but just ultimately getting somebody behind bars and prosecuted and paying for what they did.
How would you encourage that individual? Say, hey, put yourself in our situation. What if this was your long-term friend?
Just think about it. You're having that weight on your shoulder every day, knowing that you have this information that you can pass on.
The Facebook group, it says Justice for Ernie Ortiz. What would justice look like in this situation?
And we will continue to seek justice as long as it takes, you know, whether it's another 2, 3, 5, 10 years. We know that as we keep moving forward, you know, he's going to move forward with us.
One wouldn't call being a member of this deck exciting in any way, but it's the powerful exposure Alex Ramos's uncle's case can get with these cards that have his eyes full of hope. There's Ernie's. He's looking at his uncle's card for the first time.
A whole bunch of emotions that come to play looking at this. I think overall it's very positive to see this because this is an action step to get us the justice that we're seeking.
Nestled under a shady tree rests a son, brother, and friend taken too soon. Valincio Hill should have graduated high school and should have grown older, but gun violence made every decision after September 13th, 2020 for him and without his approval.
To see that heartbreak years later is it's very sad.
Reminders of missed holidays are recognized as decorations rest tangled in between both fresh and fake flowers that embellish his grave. His mother certainly makes her heartbreak known as she protects a resting place like this one. Valencio's mother spoke to us off camera and emotionally described her son as a great kid, a great student, and the perfect son. She says she wishes this would have never happened and she misses him every day. It's a heartbreak that'll never fade, but lead detective Ryan Showmaker with the Wichita Police Department wants to make it clear that he's going to continue to fight for her son.
That's one of the things that I promise every family after I worked a homicide, is that I will do everything that I can that's within my power to try to solve this case.
What makes this one kind of stand out?
I think first of all, you look at the victim, a 17-year-old young man, by all accounts a very nice young man, had a bright future, and then just due to the solvability. I mean, if people would come forward on this and tell us what they knew, I think that there's a strong probability that we will be able to solve this case.
Detective Showmaker is investigating Valincio Hill's death.
A young man with a promising future lost his life over a petty argument, and it's extremely unfortunate. He was a son, he was a brother, he was all those things. There's better ways to handle that type of situation, and it's not by shooting somebody or shooting at somebody.
Just after 8:30 p.m. on what should have been a typical September Sunday night in 2020, officers responded to a home in the 1600 block of South Water for a report of a shooting. Upon arrival, officers learned teenager Valincio Hill and a female in her 40s had been shot. Both were taken to the hospital. Valincio lost his life. The female would later be okay. Here is the home on South Water Street now. You can see 2.5 years later, it's boarded up. Investigators say unknown suspects approached the Hills' home on foot and fired shots from the street, striking the victims and surrounding property.
The two males walked up to the residence and confronted a group of people standing on the front porch, one which was Valincio Hill, the victim in this case. The two proceeded to shoot towards the individuals on the front porch, striking Valincio. He later died approximately 30 minutes later.
Investigators shared these photos of the suspect vehicle with us, hoping you would take a look.
We strongly believe that the vehicle that the two suspects arrived and left in is between a 2015 and 2018 S-Class Mercedes. It's a black color 4-door.
It was here at the Auto Motel on North Broadway on a hot July weekend in 2007 where Brandi Flint lost her life. She lived here at this motel. She also worked here as a housekeeper. It's also a place police have been to several times over the years for crimes.
This place is known as a hot spot. Anything can happen at any time.
And this one sticks out.
Was her killer from Wichita? Were they just passing through? Were they even staying at that motel? Was it somebody that was just walking by that was staying somewhere else?
Brandi, who formerly went by Randy, was a working mom and doing her best to get by.
It's a transient type of motel. People might be there for a day, people might be there for weeks, months on end. She'd been there several months. And you know, she was at least trying to make some income and cleaning rooms.
Detective Addie Perkins, who is investigating Flint's case now, says Flint lost the key to her room one morning in 142, and she went to the night manager to retrieve a spare. But when she didn't bring it back like she said she would, that's when a coworker went to go check on her.
It had been some time, not very long, probably less than about an hour. The night manager goes to Brandi's room, and she hears what she describes as screaming and yelling from inside. She describes that, you know, something's going on in there, and nobody answers the door when she's there. So she leaves. Unfortunately, 911 is not contacted at that time. Later on, she goes back about 45 minutes later, enters the room and finds Brandi deceased inside the room.
Investigators tell me there was no forced entry into the room. So did Brandi leave the door unlocked? Was it someone she knew? These are all questions that still don't have answers. But what investigators do know is who alerted them believed a struggle had taken place.
There were items knocked over. You know, it was concerning to her about how the room was laid out and finding her on the ground. We don't have one person that we're pinpointing as far as a suspect. nor did they back then.
Back then, Detective Wendy Hummel, who retired from the Wichita Police Department after over 20 years of experience, had the case.
The last time someone saw her alive was at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and about an hour later is when she was found. So we have a pretty good time frame between 5 and 6 in the morning that this occurred.
And even though she's no longer a detective,
it's the only case that I have not been able to solve as a detective in the homicide unit.
she still remembers being called in to investigate this motel murder.
I want to see it through to the end, and I want to see it resolved.
She said it then, and now too.
No one deserves to die in the way that Brandi died. You know, of course you always want to solve your cases, right? But as a detective, sometimes that's not always the case. More for me in this particular case is that I just think she deserves the person who did this to her to come to justice, and I think her family deserves it.
And here's what investigators do know.
This gentleman would have been 23 to 28 years of age. He's approximately 5'6" to 6 foot, and he had a slim or medium build. We know that he had auburn or sandy colored hair. As far as any other identifiers, he was white or Hispanic.
But due to the state of this person's body, it's been hard to parallel his profile with any familial matches or come up with any other identifiers.
There has to be a family, there has to be a friend. Somebody knows something within the community. This is too large of a community for there not to be at least one person that knows exactly what happened aside from any potential suspects.
What would it mean to get a name on this John Doe? What would it mean for you, the community, and the family of this person who's been gone?
That would be extraordinary. Once we find out the potential identity of the victim in this case, that should open up a lot more in the investigation. That'll open up associates around that time, family members. It'll give us a story of who this individual was and what was happening at the time in this person's life, which will most likely lead to identification of the motives behind the crime.
So this could be what the victim looked like.
That is an artist's rendition of potentially what the victim looked like.
A week after the body was discovered, this report was released to media. Detective Graham is reading what stands out.
The remains have been examined by the Sedgwick County Coroner's Office and a forensic anthropologist. The coroner determined that this case is a homicide and blunt trauma to the head is the cause of death.
He says all tips are impactful and adds fresh eyes sometimes yield a different perspective.
There is no insignificant information. I will weed through and look into every single tip that comes in. You never know which tip that comes in that might lead to a resolution in these cases.
Our lab people are processing the immediate scene and we'll be working on the case trying to identify this individual.
And about that time it aired, and she, one look at the screen and she knew that it was her.
People know the Shannon Olson murder case. It just sticks out in people's minds.
The day after Halloween in 1987, Shannon Olson's body was found floating in a sand pit at 29th and Hydraulic.
Only police investigators were allowed near the water's edge. What they found was the grisly aftermath of a bloody murder. A woman's nude body about 5 feet offshore. The murderer bound her hands behind her back and slit her throat. 2 frightened fishermen discovered the body first.
We just went fishing and we seen this and we freaked out and ran, called the police.
The area where she was found, back then anyway, wasn't exactly a place you'd just stumble upon either.
Peninsula here, and she was off just to the north side.
This is where Detective Timothy Rolfe says 15-year-old Shannon Olson's life most likely ended.
The great distance from where she disappeared. She disappeared from a friend's house, you're talking in the area of Lincoln and Hydraulic, and she would be found at that time at the Kansas Department of Transportation Lake, which is now bordered by the entrance ramp of 96 Highway, which didn't exist back then. At that time, it was quite a bit. It was out there.
Now, just an average part of northern Wichita, but close to 40 years ago, it wasn't a highly visible area.
People had absolutely been there before because they'd had to go there in the dark, and you don't happen upon that lake in the dark. If you don't know where you're going, you'd be like if you didn't drive into the lake. And so, but the road that goes back there doesn't look like it leads back there. Most of it. It's very, very industrial. It was very industrial at the time, and so there wouldn't have been. There'd have been really only one reason to go back there, and you plan to go back there.
Also complicated by the fact that Shannon was in water. It's not exactly a place that allows for evidence preservation.
Enemies or anyone?
Couldn't find anyone that, I mean, 15-year-olds don't usually have people that are hunting them down.